in an effort to expose what's going on right now and, you know, hopefully help change things for the better. So this couple reached out to us a few days ago, and they have a story about their experience with COVID, with the ICU, and how he recovered. So we just wanted to invite them to share their story with you so that you can have it right from their mouths. So I guess we'll start with, who are you?
So I'm Lisa Vanderquack.
And I'm David Vanderquack.
Okay, and so David, I understand that you had a pretty bad bout with COVID back in August.
I did. Around August 11th, I came down with COVID, and I stayed home for about a week and a half just trying to shake it. And I got to a point where it was difficult to breathe, and so we went to the emergency ward in Leduc, and from there they treated me and whisked me off right away to University Hospital. And I was admitted to the COVID ward there and put under care and treatment of the doctors there.
Okay, so before we go any further, I'm actually compelled by court to say something before I talk about anything that goes against AHS's protocol or the Alberta government's views and opinion on COVID. So the views and opinions I express regarding COVID-19 treatment and management are completely contrary to AHS's protocol, and they go against the Alberta government's mandate for dealing with this disease. It also goes against, or pardon me, their views and protocols for COVID also go against some doctors and how they feel it should be dealt with. But that's a conversation for another time. The science tells us, the science that AHS cites tells us, the only way to effectively manage this situation is through vaccines, social distancing, hand sanitizing, and restricting businesses out of business. So I definitely don't agree, and there's a growing number of us that don't. So with that said, I am going to let David explain his experience with COVID-19 in the ICU, how he was treated, and how he ended up walking out of the hospital before he ended up on a ventilator.
So the first night I was there, first of all, I want to say that the care I received in the hospital from the nurses and the employees there was just, man, it was top notch. It was really good. They really respected me and treated me well. And through the first process that happened was they checked me, of course, and the doctor was there and he prescribed a protocol for me. And it happened quite quickly that there was a particular doctor who wanted to get me on a ventilator, and spoke to me quite rashly, and with I don't know if it was just his experience with so many people needing the ventilators, but he gave me a whole pile of statistics about people my age, of course, that were high risk, and that I would probably need to get on a ventilator. And there was a bit of fear and intimidation and trying to motivate me to get on to the ventilator. And I resisted that. I didn't feel like I needed it at that point. I didn't quite know what I needed. I just was low on oxygen and I was having a very difficult breathing. But I wasn't ready to go on a ventilator. And so he backed off. And then so there was a day or so that went by, and then he came back about 2 o'clock in the morning, the third night I was there, and he said, "Time for the ventilator." And I was half asleep. And at that time, I called up my wife and I said, "Man, I we need to have a discussion, a conversation about this, because I was groggy and I wasn't quite sure what was going on, and I didn't want to get put on a ventilator." And so we called up Lisa, and there was a telephone. It was on speakerphone, so we could all hear it. And at that point, Lisa began to intervene and ask questions, and she's a little bit more aware of the situation than I was. And so they sort of backed off after that and let me alone. So that was twice that he had come put me on a ventilator. And then another day went by, and he wanted me to come back on the ventilator. And so by that time, my breathing was really going downhill. And I had been in the hospital by that time, what, about 4 or 5 days? Yeah. And so I thought, okay, maybe I need that. And so I was mentally ready to go on it. And so they brought me down into the ICU and they prepared me to go onto the ventilator. And but prior to that, the morning before that, well, every day they had given me a certain protocol of different drugs to help with to deal with the COVID. But we had heard about ivermectin, and I had asked if I could get some, and of course they said no, that was not part of the protocol, and besides it didn't work anyways, and there was no studies or anything about that. And so they tried to completely discredit what was already out there and existing in other countries, and with the ivermectin. And but as it turns out, my wife was able to, long story short, get me some ivermectin, and so I had taken a tablet of that, 12 milligrams of that, before I went into the ICU, and then I had another 12 milligrams when I was in the ICU, and that may be part of the turnaround as well. But when I went into the ICU, I was there for about a day and a half, almost 2 days, but I began to turn around in the ICU, and it was clear that I didn't need to be on a ventilator at that point, and so they released me from the ICU and brought me up to the COVID ward upstairs, and I was there for a few days, and then just shortly after that I was released.
So were you on any other, anything else besides the recommended protocol for COVID from AHS?
I had, my wife had also brought in some D3 vitamins, some zinc, and melatonin, and what was there another
Vitamin
one?
C. Well, they eventually put you on the intravenous vitamin C.
Right, vitamin C. So that
Now,
was
was it easy to get them to get you on vitamin C?
It took 4 days, yeah. So I had asked when we first went in about, first of all, the vitamins, because he was just on the steroid and another antibiotic and a blood thinner. And so I asked about vitamins. They said, no, we don't really do that here. And we asked about the ivermectin, and they said, no, we don't do that. And so I had heard from one of my clients about, especially for pneumonia, because he had double lung pneumonia now, and that's kind of what was causing the breathing problems. And so I'd heard from a client of mine that high dose of vitamin C intravenous, like 10,000 units, was what was needed, in addition to if we could get ivermectin, but this vitamin C. And so I had talked to a naturopath, and he said, yes, we do that all the time for cancer patients and stuff. So I had talked to his doctor 3 days into, by this time he was continually going downhill, like getting worse by the minute. And I asked her, I said, can you do that? She said, oh, no, we don't do that. We don't do intravenous vitamin C. And so because I had already done a bit of research and knew that they did it for cancer patients, I asked again. I said, well, I know you do it for cancer patients. Can you talk to the pharmacist? So she was very obliging, and she had said, you could bring in as much vitamins as you want. So I brought them in. And then the next day she had the pharmacist call me, and I had been asking for like 10. So this is like 4 days now he's in the hospital. It took from day 1 or 2 for me asking, because I was on the phone every day talking to them, trying to figure out what was going on, what they're giving him. I got a list of all the medications because I'd heard about some of the horror stories in the States of some of the medications, so I wanted to make sure that he wasn't on those.
So I'm assuming you're probably talking about remdesivir?
Remdesivir, right.
Yeah.
So what I did discover, though, is that one of the ones, the steroids that they gave him was actually suppressing his immune system.
Hence the antibiotics.
Right, and so I was concerned that, okay, if they're not giving him anything to boost his immune system, that he doesn't have anything to work with, right? I mean, I'm not a doctor, but...
Well, he would have been getting vitamins from the food he was getting.
No.
Not hospital food, no.
No. I mean, he'd already lost like 22 pounds in 10 days, so he was already really weak. And so, so anyway, she eventually said, yeah, we can give him 1,000 units. And at that moment, I really felt, as a, through prayer, and we had a group of people praying, I really felt like it was like, this is a start. And there was like the loaves and the fish, when you read about in scripture where Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fish. I felt like, okay, give them 1,000 units, start with that. And they put them on 1,000 units of the vitamin C. Well, the next day, I had someone call me and say I had some ivermectin, because at that point I put a call out. Anybody know where I can get some ivermectin?
So why did you do that? Why were you looking for ivermectin?
Because we had learned before about ivermectin, and now I was doing more research, and I thought, okay, it's really late in the game. He's a critical condition, and I knew ivermectin was more used for the early stages, but I felt like, you know what, let's do it. I'd done some research with the frontline doctors in the States, frontline COVID care, and the other thing is I had heard early on in the game, in the pandemic, about a year before that, there were a bunch of doctors on who were testifying in the States. They went before the Senate, I believe, and said that they had been successfully treating
Dr. Peter McCullough was one of them.
Patients, right? And I think Pierre Corey was one of them. And they were successfully treating patients who were coming to the clinic and helping them with ivermectin. That they had a high percentage of success rate, preventing them even going into the hospital or anything. So I thought, okay, there's something about this, but it kind of got squashed, and weren't allowed to be talked about. So I did some research, and I said, okay. And then I saw about India, how it had happened in India, how they were successfully giving all the residents a little package with ivermectin. So I thought, okay, it's worth a try. I mean, he's getting worse. He's critical. I really felt like he was going downhill, and they were putting him on a track to go on the ventilator, and I thought, no way. And if he goes there, it's like game over. So I've been just, day by day asking for wisdom from God. Say, God, what do we need to do here? And I get this phone call. They said, I've got 24 milligrams of ivermectin. Do you want it? I said, yes. Again, it's ivermectin is supposed to be administered by weight. Definitely not what he, very much lower than what he needed. But I felt like let's start him on it. And at this point, AHS or the hospital had banned me from going in to see him. I only went to see him twice, and because they said, well, you need to go home and quarantine because you've been exposed to him. And I mean, the other part of the story is that I had COVID before him. I didn't get tested. I got through it. I knew that, I wasn't contagious.
So your husband was possibly dying in the hospital.
Yes.
And you were being refused access to him because you were unvaccinated. Well,
there's a few things. That was mentioned, that I was unvaccinated, but also the fact that they couldn't prove that I had COVID and that I needed to go home and quarantine. And so there was a bit of a battle there in terms of me telling them that I'm not contagious, because they thought, well, you're exposed to him, you need to go home and quarantine for 14 days. But I knew that I could not, he's a strong guy, but if you're in that place where you're just, every breath, you are just focused on keeping alive, and because of this pressure he was getting to go on a ventilator every day, this suggestion was coming at him, this doctor, I thought, okay, no, he needs support. I cannot just let him go through this alone. And so I was fighting for that, and so I did. I went out and got an antibody test. I didn't went out and got it, just was one of those little miracles along the way to prove to them that I know that I had the antibodies, that I'm not contagious. So we get that fax to the hospital. At this point, they're prepping him to go into ICU. He's now 5 days into hospital, going downhill, prepping him. I wasn't allowed in the hospital at that point, so I managed to get him the ivermectin. He took 1 dose, that morning, and then that evening, I get an antibody test, get it faxed to the ICU to prove that I was no longer contagious. They set him in the ICU, and then the next morning he took another dose of ivermectin. I kept phoning the hospital every day and say, okay, did you get it? And the nurse would say, you know, there's different shift changes, right? So now you're having to retell them. They didn't put it on his file.
Mhm.
This was the frustrating thing. They didn't put on his file. Okay, because the doctor who had requisitioned the antibody test phoned, made sure they had it in their hands. They said, yes, we have it. So then when I phoned, I said, okay, can I come in and see him? Then another story was, no, you can't, because now he's in ICU and he's on high oxygen, and you need an N95 mask. Now it's a weekend, and they're thinking, and they said, you have to go out and get a custom fitted before we're allowed to have you in.
So your masks have to be custom fitted and properly suited to the application
N95.
to be worthwhile.
Yes, N95, because now he's in, and so they didn't think that I could do that, because now it's on a weekend and phoning around, but I did. So I phoned her back and said, okay, I got an N95 mask. Well, no, we're not letting anybody into the ICU now because da 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 da. I'm like, well, what's changed? Well, we're not letting anybody in. So then the next day, so at this point, he's getting better. He's had 2 doses of ivermectin for air. He's been on the vitamin C and, you know, just a lot
And
of...
the D as well, right? Vitamin D?
And
Yes.
yeah. Zinc as well, which, you know, they weren't giving him any of that. And next day, Sunday, his regular doctor comes in and she's like, I think you're going to be moving out of ICU. And so I talked to the doctor, and I said, can I come in? She said, well, actually, Saturday night, AHS just made this rule because they're having a breakout in the hospital, and they think that there's people bringing in COVID from outside, the visitors, so they're not letting any visitors in the hospital at all.
But the visitors all wear masks.
I know. I know. I said, what? Yeah, it's nothing to do with you, Lisa. She said, this is AHS just brought this in last night because there's a breakout and they're just trying to stop it because it's now going in different wards. So I'm like, oh, this is crazy. So the next morning, so he gets moved out of ICU on Sunday night. The next morning, he's on the ward, Monday morning, so that they can monitor and make sure he's good enough to go home. He didn't get on a ventilator, by the way. So I'm talking on the phone with him, and he's in a room with someone else now, right? So there's another guy in another bed. So while I'm talking on the phone with David, he said, oh, there's a visitor just came in my room to go to the other guy. I'm like,
Wow.
what?
Yeah.
I'm like, what? So I said, let me call you back. So then I phoned the nurse's station again, and, you know, but this was like a daily thing. So she said, well, no, well, you can't because you're supposed to be quarantining. And I go through the whole rigmarole again. Nothing. I said, you need to call, it's already been faxed, da, da, da. It wasn't on the file. So I go back and forth phone calls with these people. And, you know, they excuse after excuse. Say, you need to get, and I said, I don't need to be quarantined. I have an antibody test to prove it, da, 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 da. And then she said, well, yeah, but you need to, so the last thing she said, well, now the unit manager says that you need to have a negative COVID test. And then I got mad. I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. No, you have proof. I'm not doing it. And so then I said, you know what? I said this to the unit manager. Because at that point, I'm like, I knew you were trying to prevent me from getting in to see him for no reason. I said, you know what? Why don't you put that in writing? Why you are not allowing me to come in to see my husband, even though you have proof that I don't have COVID and that I have the antibody. I want you to put that in writing because I need to bring it to my lawyer. So she said, well, I said, I have the proof. You need to get it and you need to let me see him. So she said, well, let me call you back. And so then 15 minutes later, I get a phone call. Okay, you can come in and see him now.
It's funny, whenever we mention the word lawyer with AHS, they tend to change their tune.
Yeah. But this all, I believe, you know, part of it was because along the way they found out that we weren't vaccinated. Because that was something that one of the doctors had said about, made a comment, and she said, well, there's different rules for the unvaccinated. And so...
For the unvaccinated.
For those who choose not to be vaccinated.
Were you asked if you were vaccinated when you first were admitted?
Yeah. I was asked probably about 4 times by 4 different doctors. They all wanted to know.
I wonder why they would ask that if you're in the hospital with bad COVID. If they're wondering if you've been vaccinated.
You're fighting for your life. And asked, I mean, one of them even asked, well, why are you not? And what is your reason for not?
Yeah.
Like,
And then at the end too, when I was, just before I was being discharged, they wanted to know if I wanted to be vaccinated. And the guy in the bed beside me said, yeah, I want to be vaccinated. And I thought, no, now I have the natural antibodies to this. I've got the real overcoming of this, this virus.
And they know that because they asked Lisa to get an antibody test to prove that she wasn't at risk or a risk.
That's right.
And that's something that I have a huge problem with. So I want to get this out. I do believe COVID is real. Mm-hmm. I do believe that it can be dangerous for some. I don't believe that the only way out of this is to shut down society, turn people against each other, and perform experimental vaccinations on everybody and force them to. I don't believe that at all. It seems to me that there's more and more evidence every day that we have tools to deal with this. Other countries are using ivermectin. Why can't we?
Yeah.
All our lives we're told, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, be healthy. But then when we're getting sick, or when lots of people are getting sick, instead of saying to Alberta, Albertans, we're in cold and flu season. Protect your health. Take your vitamin D, because as Canadians, we don't get enough in the fall.
Yeah.
Take your vitamin C. Mm-hmm. Zinc has been shown to be effective reducing COVID symptoms. Mm-hmm. Take your aspirin if you're getting a little older and you're at risk for blood clots and heart disease. Mm-hmm. Why in the world would we not be promoting good health to keep people out of the hospital in the first place? Instead, we let people get to the point where you could barely breathe and you had to go to the hospital. We try and force them on ventilators before we're trying treatments that have shown effective in other places. And that's a question that I want everybody to start asking of our health providers. Why are we going down this path? Why are we not promoting good health? Why is it's pushed down our throats that the only way through this is with this vaccination?
Mm-hmm. Well, the other question too, I think, is why are we not questioning if something is not working, that maybe we need to change what we're doing, right? Right.
We have 83% of Alberta vaccinated. We have more COVID than we've ever had. Something's not right. Why are we not looking at this? I just mentioned today, I looked on AHS's website, and in October 8th to 14th, there's a graph. There was about 1,000 of the current cases were from close exposure to COVID. Mm-hmm. About another 1,000 were breakout cases from that group. The travel was insignificant, almost statistically zero. And an unknown column was 10,000-ish. It's hard to read the graph. Now my question is, how many of those 10,000 are vaccinated? And how many of those 10,000 have been in close contact with somebody who's vaccinated? And I think there's important questions to answer. Yeah. Or there are important questions to ask, and we need the answers, because if AHS is really concerned about the health and welfare of Albertans, these are questions that have to be asked so that we can get the truth, so that we can save people's lives. Yeah. Right? It's not about whether or not they agree with me opening my restaurant against restrictions. It's not about whether or not they agree with somebody about whether or not they want to get a vaccine. It has to do with using science, which is asking questions, to get the truth so that we can determine the best path for each individual. Yeah. And the other thing that really bothers me is the doctor-patient relationship. Yeah. Right? So it used to be that if you went to your family doctor and said, "Man, doc, I've got COVID really bad. Can we try this ivermectin?" He'd probably say, "Well, they don't recommend it, but I mean, we can try it." Mm-hmm. I've asked my doctor to try things before that they don't recommend that work for me. And when you take away that relationship with your doctor, where you can discuss these things and plan your own health choices, and you put it in a central repository, yeah, I think it's extremely dangerous. Yeah. Because those aren't our doctors. Dr. Hinshaw is not my doctor, and I don't trust her. Yeah. So we need that trust, because if you had been able to do that in the first place, maybe and I'm not saying for sure, but maybe you would have not had to go to the hospital.
I agree. I totally agree. I think it would have prevented that. And at that point, we really didn't have any access to it, didn't know about it in terms of that, and trusted to some degree that we're going to get some care when we get to the hospital. But it became really obvious that although they were caring for him as much as they could, in terms of the nurses were doing that, the protocol and that was coming down is they were restricted to only prescribe certain things. And that became really evident.
I'm aware of another doctor in this area who actually prescribed ivermectin to one of his patients, actually a few of his patients. I'm going to talk with that family as well. But he had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. AHS told him, we won't investigate you if you don't talk about this. Sign an NDA. Why is that? Why is he being silenced? Why are they trying to force me to say what they want to say? None of that stuff makes sense. And I'm not going to get into, this is big nefarious conspiracy thing going on. I think this has to do more with the egos of the bureaucracy and the administration within our health system. I think it's a problem, and I think it's questions, we got to start asking these questions and holding them to account.
Yeah. I think, and it seems that like the doctors and the nurses, to some degree, are instructed what they need to do. The administration seems to have a large control over what happens, and I say that just because of the experience. It became really obvious that they only could do certain things because this is what was directed to them, instead of the doctor having the autonomy, like you said, with the patient, say, well, would you like us to try something different? Would you like us to? There was none of that. This is we're going to take you. So I didn't really feel like they were actually treating him for COVID, which he didn't. It was more than pneumonia. But the only thing they were focused on was the oxygen, increasing the oxygen, or getting him into that, rather than, okay, what else can we do to take that infection down or to increase your immune system so that you can fight this? None of that. It was more, okay, we need to get your oxygen. And so I feel, and I'm not a doctor, but again, you can observe and see, okay, well, why are we not changing that thing if he's getting worse? And I didn't feel like they actually had the ability to do that. It was almost like, no, this is what we have to do. This is the protocol.
Yeah, and their hands are tied. It's either toe the line, follow the protocol, shut your mouth, or you lose your job. And I don't agree with that. So personally, I'm going to do whatever I can to try and expose that. I want to do what I can to encourage doctors who want to treat their patients to stand up and speak out, because the more of them that do it, the better off we're all going to be. And it doesn't matter if people, they hate me and they want to destroy me because of what I've been doing, or they love me and they support me for what I'm doing. That's insignificant. What's significant is we need to untie our doctors' hands and let them do the job they signed up for.
Yeah.
They didn't sign up to be to follow a list on a wall of the only things they could do. They signed up to be scientists that helped us stay healthy. Period. And bureaucracy has no place in that. So how are you feeling now?
I've been out of hospital about just a little longer than 6 weeks, and been exercising a lot and working the lungs out. My energy is back. I feel strong again. Some of my muscle mass is coming back again. That's good. And my lungs are just about back to running capacity. So it's good. I feel a whole lot better.
That's awesome. And now you both have antibodies, presumably. And there should be a place within society for you. Now, one person that spoke out about this is Paul Brandt. So, Paul Brandt used to be a nurse, so he's very familiar with healthcare and how it works. His big question is, why do people that have natural immunity to COVID have no place in society right now? You were in the hospital and they said you needed to show this antibody test to prove that you weren't at risk or a risk.
Right.
Yet, we don't have that option right now with these vaccine passports that aren't actually passports, it's an exemption. So why is that? Where are the people with natural immunity? Where is their place in society? Why isn't it being recognized? Why is the only thing recognized a vaccine? And I have a feeling it has to do with $37 billion.
Mm-hmm.
But what do I know? I think that's another important question to start asking.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too for people to know is that because the what's called a vaccine is was an emergency vaccine. They pushed it out. There's an emergency, and the only way they can do that is if they have no other treatment.
Ah, that's right. Yeah.
Have no other treatment. The only way they can have an emergency vaccine is if it's deemed that there's no other treatment available. And that's why I think ivermectin and all those other ones are being suppressed, because it is a legitimate treatment. And there's different parts of the world that have been using it for 40, 50 years. And even recently in India, I was even actually speaking to someone from India today, and they said, oh, we're good. We're under control here because of the ivermectin and the zinc and all those things that they've given.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, well, okay, what is it about, what are they trying to gain by pushing this emergency vaccine? Why are they trying to coerce people if it's all about safety and health?
I'm going to try and not think out there too much, and I'm going to say it probably has to do with money. Right? Ivermectin is not, the patent's expired, it doesn't make anybody money. Also, it's not listed on the label for that use. However, your doctor can actually prescribe you whatever he wants.
Yes.
Off-label to treat whatever. Doctors prescribed aspirin back in the day, off-label for heart disease, to prevent heart attacks.
Yeah.
And some other doctors told them they're crazy, that's off-label, why would you do that? Well, because it works.
Yeah.
Right? Off-label drugs are used to treat things all the time, all over the world, and never before, at least what I've seen, has a doctor ever been prevented from using an effective drug off-label. In this case, it's very sad that people can't get past the fact that it's also used on horses.
Yeah.
No, it is not just a horse medicine.
No.
There is a human and an animal form of the drug. Even so, our basic physiology is very similar. So it does the same job. And yeah, I don't know.
It was actually developed for humans first.
Yep.
Ivermectin was developed for human.
Won a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
Changed millions of lives, billions maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but you probably heard the NIH site actually lists ivermectin number two as a treatment for COVID. Yep. So it is recognized as a treatment for COVID. It's just not being made known. The doctors are not told that. And yeah, so there's a lot of questions, a lot of things that are happening that makes us question why are we not allowed to gain access to certain treatments?
Mm-hmm. On my follow-up visit to the doctor, it was about 2 weeks after I came out of the hospital, I asked her, could I get a prescription for some ivermectin? And she said no. I says, well, is that because you are not able to get it or you won't? And she says, well, it's actually both. You know, it's not. And then I got the whole explanation. It wasn't scientifically verifiable that it would help and anything else. And then I said, well, if you could, would you? And she, they can't. It's like someone has told them not to do that. I also, I'm a carpenter, and so we build out pharmacies and medical clinics and doctors' offices. And so every time we build out a pharmacy over the last year, I've been asking the pharmacist, I says, can I get some ivermectin from you? And some of these guys are able to prescribe, and every last one of them had the same line. It's like they've all been trained by Big Pharma to say, no, it doesn't work, it's not an effective medicine, and besides, we won't give it to you anyway. And then I said, well, I think I'm going to be getting malaria. You know, can I have it for that? They said, no, you can't. We can't even, you know, some of these guys even said they can't even get it. So what's all that about?
That's not the only thing either. We used to be able to go to the pharmacist if your kid, you know, we think your kid's got strep, go to the pharmacist, they could swab you right there.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to a hospital. People go to hospital and they get sick. It's the way it is. That's where sick people go. And if you can do something away from the hospital, you probably should. So you used to be able to do that. You can't now. The only thing they can do is a COVID test.
Yeah.
So they have hogtied a lot of our health professionals to the point where their effectiveness as a scientist, as a doctor, as a nurse, as a pharmacist has been reduced drastically.
Yeah.
Zombies, robots, this is what you do, don't do anything else. It's like you go to a Ford dealership and you ask them if they can fix something in their car. Well, no, they don't fix it, they replace it.
Right.
They change parts.
Yeah.
Our doctors, they're turning them into nothing but parts changers. And that's efficient. We don't have warranties.
Yeah. But Chris, when you were a kid, did you, I don't know if you got chicken pox or you...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right? You didn't. So if you had chicken pox, you didn't need to get a vaccine for it, right?
No, they recommended not to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we see that with measles, with mumps, all those ones. So why is this one any different? Why is it now? It doesn't matter if you've had it. You still need to get a vaccine.
And on that topic, I've got all my vaccinations,
Yeah.
except for the one that I don't want.
Yeah.
My kids have them all. I worked overseas and I got more needles in my arms than I ever have in any other time in my life. So I don't have a problem with vaccines.
No, we don't.
I have a
either.
problem with lack of choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's my problem.
Yeah, and we're the same. It's not about the vaccine or other vaccines, but it's about the choice.
So what would you say if I was a person who was staunchly opposed to considering any alternative medications or vitamin treatments or maintaining proper health for COVID, and I only said, do your part, get vaccinated. What's wrong with you? How would you respond to me today?
I would say I've already got the antibodies. I'm not at risk for that for your health or for mine. So there's enough science that supports that.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about the science shows us that it actually doesn't protect you. It doesn't keep you from getting COVID. People who have the injections now are getting COVID and some of them are having adverse effects and dying. I heard today there's actually more people have died than have actually died of the injection than have died of COVID.
That's interesting. I'll have to look into that one.
And so, yeah, don't quote me on that. I heard that out there said, but I would say, because I've got the antibodies as well, what will it do any better, more for me than that? And the fact is that you can still get COVID if you are injected. So it's really doesn't do me any good.
Well, I can tell you one thing it will do good for you.
What's that?
You'll know that you've done your part in putting another $40 in Pfizer's pocket.
Well, this is the narrative that's out there, is that being responsible. But the logic breaks down. You think, well, if you have a vaccination, if you feel that this is going to protect you and also for the person around you, then you shouldn't be concerned about other people. If you're vaccinated and you're around people who are not vaccinated, then you're protected. Or if you're wearing a mask, you're protected if you believe that. So why is there so much fuss around getting other people to get the jab if you are safe? So if we talk about science, it doesn't add up. If you look at it scientifically, and so for me, the information doesn't give me enough confidence that, first of all, that it works and that I need it, or that there's been enough actual testing and trials. I mean, years ago, they wouldn't put a vaccine on the market until it was years of testing. Not human testing either. Years of testing before they put it out there. And they would be constantly monitoring when they did put it into humans, whether or not it would be having adverse effects. And immediately, if there was, they would stop it. That's not happening with this one. And so that's of great concern to me.
Well, because it's an emergency use, and if we don't do it, everybody's going to die of COVID, right? So that's their justification, I'm sure.
But it's not based on the full picture. They're just based on it. That's
right. And the data and statistics we have at this point, after 2 years into this, does not support what they're trying to do. So.
No.
Yeah, I don't think I have any other questions, is there anything else you can think of?
No, I think it's important for people to do the research. Like, don't just listen to the mainstream media. There's scientists and doctors all over the world, credible, who have very different experiences with what's going on right now, and legitimate, actual evidence of how to treat COVID, and are getting very different results using other treatments. And I think it's important for, especially now that they're trying to push this on children,
Yes.
trying to bring it to children, I think it's really important that you do your homework and don't take this decision lightly.
And don't let them intimidate you that if you get some information off the internet or off some YouTube stuff, you know, there's some really, really good stuff out there. You just gotta look at lots of it and then begin to discern, okay, this makes a little bit more sense. And then begin to use your wisdom and knowledge. You're healthy. You have a brain. You have a thought pattern. You've been trained, and you have friends and you have family you can discuss these things with. Develop a community where you can talk about these things, and have a place where you can, you know, have a chance to be wrong and to be corrected, and also to bring that wisdom to somebody else. And so in that way, we can grow in knowledge, and we also will not be victims of circumstances of saying, well, I didn't know, I shouldn't have did this. But there's a lot of good information out there. You might have to dig a little. There's a lot of lousy information too. So use your mind. You're smart. You're intelligent. You're a human. You're not an animal, and you can figure this out and go deep on this thing.
If not, ask Chris. He's got lots of stuff.
Well, you know, I was just going to say, and my advice is, if there's a doctor or a scientist or a pharmacist or whatever out there who is willing to put their $500,000 a year job on the line
Absolutely.
to go against the status quo, there's a reason why. Men like that don't just give up their career that they've built over 20 or 30 or 40 years for nothing. So pay attention to those guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good
That's a
word.
great